10. A note on earthquakes, volcanoes, and women. The Enlightenment's deification of reason had important consequences for women. It meant their progressive subjugation to men in an anti-biblical sense, and their separation from the world of affairs. In the medieval and Reformation eras, the role of women in society was a necessary one. While their position was held to be in subordination to their fathers and then their husbands, it was not one of irrelevance. A wife was to her husband what a prime minister is to a king, only stronger, in that she could not be dismissed as a prime minister can be. The practical and usually theoretical role of women was thus a very important one. With the Enlightenment, men with amazing arrogance saw themselves as rational creatures and women as merely emotional creatures. Clearly, authority could not be given to passion, and as a result, the control and possession of property and power by women was steadily limited and/or denied. Progress was held to require the rule of reason, meaning the male. Passion would thereby be rendered harmless, and the world would advance more rapidly towards utopia. Whatever is right, the Enlightenment proclaimed, and it was right that women, representing passion, be regarded as fit only for those duties pertaining to children and religion, and not for the pursuit of ideas. Thus began the long association of women with church life, which marks the modern era. Religion, it was held, as it appears in the churches, is not rational. Its appeal is thus essentially to women and children. Reason governs the world of nature and must govern the world of men. An earthquake shattered this superficial rationale and changed the thinking of the Western world. On November the 1st, 1775, 15,000 people lost their lives in the Lisbon earthquake. Its intellectual repercussions exceeded its physical damage. Rational religion, philosophy, and art began to crumble, and the Romantic movement was born in a generation. As Kendrick observed of the men of that day, quote, "After the earthquake, they were not going to admit that everything that happens for the best, that whatever is right." End quote. The totally rational God of the philosophers, the first cause who was also the great mathematician, had suddenly been revealed as irrational. Whether called God or nature, the Enlightenment idea of the ultimate was suddenly irrelevant to reality. Instead of being the best of all possible worlds, the world was suddenly alien to all such concepts and oblivious to man's idea of reason. Clarke has observed, quote, "Readers of Voltaire's Candide will remember how the smooth surface of common-sense optimism was cracked by the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. It was the 18th century equivalent of the sinking of the Titanic. The immediate effect of the earthquake was extraordinary. Madame de Pompadour gave up rouge for a week. She has offered it up," said Horace Walpole, "to the demon of earthquakes. And for a fortnight the stakes wagered at White's were substantially reduced. Never before," said Goethe, who was 6 at the time, "has the demon of fear so quickly and so powerfully spread horror throughout the land." End quote. For humanistic man, the setting at naught of all human calculations and philosophies meant that the universe had to be irrational. God and reason had been defined, together with nature, in terms of man, in terms of man's image of himself. Any contradictions of that image meant that God and nature were irrational. A major consequence of this change was a changed view of women. Irrationality, not reason, was now ultimate and omnipotent. The Romantics thus regarded women as potential goddesses or potential witches. Enlightenment man could call a woman a goddess, but it was self-serving flattery and a part of courtly etiquette, not reality. The goddesses of art were alluring beauties whose function it was to please the males, gods, and no more. Now woman became as fearful a power as dark and irrational nature, ever a potential earthquake or volcanic eruption. Man could only live with this irrationality by circumspection, working ever to keep it under the control of male reason. Increasingly, the emphasis of this new movement was on, quote, the natural superiority of women, end quote. Men too began to abandon reason, especially after Freud, and sought to gain power through primitivism and irrationality. Liberal males began to imitate women in their ostensible hyper-emotionalism and to wear their hair long as a sign of their loss of rationalistic inhibitions. Conservative males, in contrast, acted as Enlightenment men of reason, called to suppress and put into its place that mass of irrationality known as woman. Society was acting out a role in a drama of social roles written by the logic of modern philosophy. Should not be surprised by this. Men commit suicide even when their outward circumstances invite envy from others because their imaginations are filled with obsessive and perverse ideas. The suicide is killed by his mind, by his ideas. Societies are no less victims of their own imagination.